As leaders, we just when we were married for a year, we went
okay.
Okay. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Andrew Marcus. I'm Director of Community Development here at Kehila, Kedosha, Janina. If it's your first time here, welcome. We're the only Greek Romaniotes synagogue in the Western Hemisphere. We've been here almost 100 years, keeping up our Greek Romaniote traditions. We're an active synagogue, open every Shabbat, Jewish holidays. If it's your first time, come upstairs afterwards, check out our sanctuary. On the second floor is our museum. And we have educational programs like this throughout the year. We just had 2 months ago our annual Greek Jewish Festival. If some of you were there, we had thousands of people out on the street on Broom Street. We have lots of other exciting programs coming up later this summer and the fall, including our new series Torah and Taberna Night, where we have guest speakers and live Greek music and Greek appetizers. So follow us on Facebook, sign up for our email list, check out our website. You're welcome here today, but we'd love to have you come back any other time, whenever you like. Yeah. Sorry, the phone locked. Sorry, 1 second. We're really excited to have you all here today because our dear friend Dr. Josh Lipson is part of the leadership of the Jewish Genetic Discovery Foundation, a brand new initiative that we'll be hearing about this afternoon. So before I turn it over to them and their exciting new research, I want to introduce them formally. So Dr. Lipson is, like I said, a dear community member of our synagogue. He's co-president of the Jewish Genetic Discovery Foundation. He's also a psychologist, a poet, and a Hebrew teacher. He's been interested in Jewish and ancient Near Eastern history since elementary school, and in 2006, used his bar mitzvah money to purchase his first genealogy test. He's been involved in multiple academic studies of historical and modern Jewish DNA, collaborating with luminaries including Shai Carmi and Karl Skorecki. So Jeremy Kotliar, you want to raise your hand? Is right here, another leader of this organization. He's a native New Yorker born to Soviet Jewish refugees from the 90s immigration wave. He's been interested in genetic genealogy and Jewish history since childhood, extending his family tree deep into the 18th and 19th century Ukraine. He currently serves on the board of directors of the Jewish Genetic Discovery Foundation, and he's passionate about revealing connections between Jewish communities across the globe. And Jeremy recently completed his BS in neuroscience and is applying to medical school, and he lives in Great Neck, so not that far. Yeah, so Great Neck people over here. And then finally, Eric Kolchinsky, right here, is the treasurer of the Jewish Genetic Discovery Foundation. He's been a finance professional for almost 30 years. He first began his discovery in genetics in 2014 with a quest to discover his family's paternal grandfather. The grandfather was named Solomon, who died at the Battle of Stalingrad, actually. And neither Eric nor his father knew much about that side of the family. So while the research didn't turn out that much, he caught up with the fascinating world of Jewish genetic history. He was born also in Soviet Ukraine, but he's currently a resident of the New York metropolitan area. So without further ado, give it up for the leaders of the Jewish.
Thank you. Okay, so I figure we can get started. Thanks for the lovely intro, Andrew, and for making KKJ available for this gathering today. I'm super stoked to talk about the Jewish Genetic Discovery Foundation, which we formally incorporated in the last few months. So very briefly, who are we? We're a collective of what we call citizen scientists. We became friends online during the pandemic on a little online platform called Discord. Maybe some of the younger folks in the room are familiar with it. And we've snowballed and grown and gained new connections and friends over the years. We're passionate about Jewish history, culture, and DNA. We come from a wide range of backgrounds, as you can see, and also a wide range of generations. I feel like I'm right in the middle, actually. These are just a few of our board members. We also need a shout out to Emmanuel Izalov, who's our resident mountain Jewish expert. They're hiking by the ruins at Delphi in Greece. So yeah, that's just a few of us. And so DNA has a lot to tell us about Jewish history. This isn't such a new revelation. Modern population genetics as a science traces back about 25, 30 years. And there's some things that have already been gleaned that we're just showing up in the middle of. So for example, for 30 years now, and we know more and more about this every day, we've known that people with traditions of being Kohanim around the world are related to each other, share a male ancestor who lived almost 3,000 years ago. This is inscribed in our genes. So whether you're Persian, Jewish, Ashkenazi, Greek, it's a remarkable story. We know that we share roots in the land of Israel. Obviously, there have been changes and there's been blending, but all the major Jewish communities around the world share that common origin. Male and female lines tell slightly different stories, and today, apologies, no offense intended, but for scientific reasons, we're focusing a little bit more on the male lines, because that's actually how most Jewish communities are related to each other, on the male side. And then in 2022, I had the pleasure of being part of an academic study that was the first one to look at medieval Jewish remains from a cemetery in Germany that actually helped us solve the story of how Ashkenazi Jews today came to be, which the short story is as a merger of two medieval European Jewish communities. And then in addition to that, one thing that hasn't been reported much is, and this is something that was sort of already known by historians and cultural experts, genetics has revealed that genetically there are two main kinds of groups, two main kinds of Jews. Western Jews and Eastern Jews, depending on whether the Jews who lived in the land of Israel in classical times went to the Greco-Roman world or to the Persian and Babylonian world. And it's the main genetic difference among Jews. And today, since we're at a Romaniote and Greek Sephardic synagogue and community center, we're mostly talking about Western Jews, although there are a lot of interesting stories about Eastern Jews and how the two groups are connected. So the Western Jewish story is really illuminated by DNA in this way. We basically know that despite all the cultural differences, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, North African, Italian, Romaniote, even to some degree Syrian Jews, are one genetic cluster. Even if we look different, even if we speak different languages, even if we've been apart for 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 years, these are all very genetically similar groups. And this all goes back to 2,000 years of shared history in the Greco-Roman world. And I won't get into the details of that, but it's a super fascinating story. I always like to say when I'm here at KKJ, I'm not Greek Jewish, but I can say with certainty that 2,000, 1,800, 1,600 years ago, many or most of my ancestors were probably speaking Greek in different cities in the Roman Mediterranean. That's the story of all these Jewish groups. So, and the best proof of this, again, comes through connections in Y chromosomal DNA. I'll explain what that means and why that's the case. So what is Y DNA? So if you are a biological male, you have a Y chromosome. It's the smallest chromosome of all the chromosomes that we have, and it's passed down directly from father to son throughout the generations. If you've ever taken a basic genetics 101 class, you know that for most chromosomes, you get one copy of each, one strand of each, from your mother and your father. And over the generations, they blend together. So you have DNA from all your grandparents, all your great-grandparents, and so on. They recombine. The Y chromosome is different. It gets passed directly from father to son throughout the years. And it determines male sex, but really not much else. It doesn't determine whether you have blue eyes or whatever, have perfect pitch. It really just is what determines genetic maleness. And it mutates. This is a really important point. It mutates at a slow, predictable pace. So we can look at the Y chromosome as being a kind of genetic clock. The molecular clock allows us to match up sequences of mutations in the Y chromosome to known history in really powerful ways. And even though you can never fully guarantee a correspondence between those two ways of understanding the world, you can come to some pretty powerful conclusions when you make inferences based on that molecular clock. It's very relevant to historical and linguistic questions, and it was the first tool available to historical geneticists to help unravel Jewish history, and we think it's in some ways still the best. Yeah. So Y chromosome lineages. Imagine a family tree, a big family tree, going back hundreds of years, thousands of years. Very few of us, with the exception of some old school Sephardic families that go back to rabbis in medieval Spain, very few of us can trace our families back past the 18th century if we're lucky, maybe a little bit farther. Jeremy helped me trace my family back to the 18th century, the Lipsons, but that was actually very hard. Y chromosome lineages allow us to look at the genes of people who don't know each other, who don't know that they're related, and to find hidden family trees by another name of people who share common male line ancestry. And they allow us to build family trees going back hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of years. And really, anybody who has a Y chromosome, we can test their Y chromosome and figure out exactly where it falls on the world family tree of Y chromosome sequences. It's incredible. The more shared mutations you have, the more recently related you are, any given pair of people. And we can now estimate the date of any Y DNA match using that molecular clock method. And it keeps getting better and better with time. So this is actually a little diagram of the Y chromosome lineage belonging to our friend Manny here, which you can see basically going back to about 650 BC. Almost everyone in there is Jewish. There are some people who were Jewish, exited Jewish communities, but does anybody know what was happening in Jewish history around 650 BC?
Josiah, Hezekiah.
On the mark, yeah, exactly. So this was the final century of the kingdom of Judah after the destruction of the northern kingdom of Israel. And I don't want us to take this date estimate completely literally. It's an estimate, but this is essentially telling us it's pretty likely that Mr. Isilov here, who I don't know how far back you can trace your family in the Caucasus, but 7 generations. It goes dark after 7 generations, but then all of a sudden we're in 650 BC in the kingdom of Judah. And then if you go back to about 1150 BC, then there's connection with a large group of Saudis and Yemenis. So very, very interesting. I won't get into exactly what that means, but the whole story is written in our genes. You can look at anybody's Y chromosome, and it can tell you stories about where their family was 500 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 5,000, 10,000 years ago. So this is nothing short of a miracle as far as we're concerned, and we want to capitalize on it and learn as much as we can about Jewish history by reconstructing these family trees. So just some examples I wanted to give. As I said, every family tells a part of the story of the Jewish people. All that migration history, all of those, we have a vague sense of we were once there, now we're here. Certain events happened at certain moments in time, but the fine-grained detail is often lost to the sands of history. But DNA doesn't lie, and every Y chromosome of every Jewish person from every community has the potential to reveal part of the story. So I just wanted to briefly share examples from the Y chromosome lineages of folks here. So I'll just give you an example here, right? I'm able to, some of you know these people. For a while, I didn't know my direct male line, going back past the mid-1800s in northwestern Ukraine, up to my great-great-grandfather, Shalom. And then Jeremy, who reads Russian and found some archival documents, was able to trace it back to Yehuda in the mid-18th century. But, how would there be any way to go beyond that? Well, what we do know is that I belong to a big Jewish Y chromosome lineage that I'll talk about a little bit in a second, that traces back to a common Jewish ancestor who lived 1900 years ago and is shared across different Jewish communities. There are all these sub branches. Imagine this is like, this is like saying I live in America. This is like saying I live in Washington Heights. It's like a subsection. And we're able to get through all of these layers of the family tree all the way, there's still a gap between maybe 1750 and 1350, but very little. So much of history is revealed in the genes. And basically, all of my connections through here are Ashkenazi Jews. And if you go one step back, that's extremely interesting. I won't talk in too much detail about this, but through testing, we've been able to find that we are talking about an important founder of Jewish communities throughout the Roman world who had multiple offshoots that ended up in Ashkenaz, in Spain, after Spain in places like Rhodes and Turkey, in places like Libya and Tunisia and Sicily, all going back to an ancestor who lived in 150. We don't know if that was in Rome or Carthage or Jerusalem. Very hard to say. We do know that it's ultimately a Middle Eastern line, but there are a lot of mysteries, that can be revealed with further testing. But I guarantee my father and grandfather did not know these things through family lore. So this is possible for everyone here. So, and this is just a speculative migration history of, there are a lot of Jews in Rome, southern Italy, in the 2nd century. Maybe these different child branches went to different parts of the Roman Empire in time. So again, we can begin to make these inferences, even if they're not 100%. Please don't take these completely literally. And do you want to talk about it, or we can?
Why don't you talk?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So Mr. Kolchinsky.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Kolchinsky here is a great friend and collaborator. As we heard before, got into this because his grandfather died at the Battle of Stalingrad, and there's a brick wall beyond that.
Nobody. Most of the family was destroyed in the Holocaust.
But his Y chromosome, I think, is actually one of the most powerful, reliable signals of an origin in ancient Israel. Why is that? Because these very different Jewish branches found in, on one hand, Ashkenazi and Italian Jews, and on the other hand, in Iraqi Jews, and also a Lebanese Muslim family, interestingly, share a common ancestor around 1100 BC. And we think that whenever two Jewish communities, or two Jewish branches from two different communities converge in ancient times and have very few non-Jewish relatives, that this is proof of a common ancient Jewish ancestor. Does anybody know what was happening in our history around 1100 BC? Before the time of King David. So imagine traditionally, and different people have different views about the historical truth of the traditions. This is the time of the judges, the prophet Samuel, the Deborah, for example, the battle of the waters of Merom. So we believe that Eric's Y chromosome preserves a trace of that. It's also very interesting that the closest cousin to this line is actually an Iraqi Kurd, very close cousin. He sort of split from this guy 100 years, 200 years before. So we actually believe that this is related to Aramean migrations to the land of Israel during the time that ancient Israel was being founded. So far cry from the battlefield at Stalingrad. So anyway, again, speculative, but I think it's pretty cool.
I like that speculation.
Jeremy, do you want to talk about your Y chromosome briefly?
Yeah, sure.
Sweet.
Hi, everyone. This is my paternal lineage that I discovered through testing with family tree DNA around 5 years ago or so. And it's perhaps a less typical story. So we over here, this is my branch where we have all my cousins, my paternal cousins. We are a collection of Ashkenazi Jews who have a common ancestor who lived around the 14th century in Eastern Europe. Now, you might think this was probably a Yiddish-speaking Jew named Zalman or something like that. Actually, that seems not to have been the case, because in Eastern Europe, and by that I mean east of Poland, there actually were no Ashkenazi Jews in the 14th century. Instead, there was a very small non-Ashkenazi community there that eventually would get swallowed by Ashkenazi migrations. That makes up maybe less than 1% of the ancestry of most Ashkenazim today. And I just happen to preserve the genetic legacy of that community. Not something I expected. Now, this branch, this Jewish branch, happens to be one of 13, lucky number, that shares a common ancestor around 2150 BCE, who lived in the South Caucasus, somewhere around Armenia, probably was some sort of major tribal chieftain in that area. So that's a very nice history, but that leaves me with a question that maybe Eric or Josh don't really have, which is what happened between 2100 BCE, which is before the Jewish people even existed, and 1300 CE. And well, I'll have to be honest with you, I have no idea exactly what happened. But there are a couple of hints which we have from people who tested with other companies, not family tree DNA, some lower resolution tests, that suggest that they might be in the neighborhood of this Y chromosomal lineage, including a Jewish family from Damascus, some mountain Jewish families actually from the Caucasus, and an Arab Muslim from the Israeli city of Tzfat. Now, most of these other branches are full of Caucasians, really. So, logically, it might be that those Jews and that Arab Muslim connects to my DNA lineage. But the truth is, we have no idea until we get a higher resolution test with family tree DNA, which is part of what's motivating this project. Because as an Ashkenazi Jew, even though my community is very, very well tested, ultimately I can't have the full picture of my history, and none of us can if all Jewish communities aren't tested. Because we're all one big family at the end of the day.
So the missing link could be a Caucasian mountain Jew that's connecting
your lineage in Europe to the Caucasus?
It's possible, yes. That's one possibility, that my lineage is actually some sort of medieval migration from the Mizrahi Jewish communities of the East to Eastern Europe. But we'll have to get these families tested and find out.
Wow. Beautifully spelled out, Jeremy. Thank you for that. So I wanted to bring things a little bit more to the KKJ world, right? The specific realm of Balkan and Ottoman Jews, whether they identify as Romaniot or Sephardic, which is actually a finer line than a lot of people think. Romaniot and Ottoman Sephardic Jews come out of the same locations and the same mix of components, it seems like. A friend of ours from the internet, who's not formally part of the Jewish Genetic Discovery Foundation, mapped out the results from Ottoman Jewish censuses of different cities in the Ottoman Jewish world. And what was interesting is, we hear that Sephardi Jews are from Spain, whether they ended up in Turkey, Greece, wherever. But it turns out that if you look a few hundred years ago, the Jewish communities in cities like Salonika and Istanbul were very mixed. People still only went to synagogue with people who had the same origin as them, whether that was Calabria, Apulia, native to Greece, Hungary, Sicily, etc., Spain, Catalonia. So these communities were really melting pots. And at the end of the day, most of the people in those communities, especially if they were from Spain, Portugal, Italy, but some who were native to Greece, glommed onto this Ladino-speaking Sephardic identity, and then many others retained a Romaniot identity, but with some people from Italy and Spain joining that Romaniot fold too. So essentially, DNA is already hinting at this. Eastern Sephardic Jews and Romaniotes are extremely closely related overall. But every family and every surname tells a piece of the puzzle. So, it seems to be that the majority of Greek, Turkish, Balkan, Sephardic Jews who have Spanish names have Y chromosomal connections to Moroccan Jews, to Hispanic people. I'm thinking of the last name Calderon. I have a good friend in this community, Mark Calderon. His family's from North Macedonia. And that Y chromosome connects to Moroccan Jews, to Mexicans. But then I think of another friend of mine from this community, another Mark, Varsano, for example. And I've been told by our collaborator, the great Jewish surname expert, Alexander Bader, that the name Varsano comes from southern Italy. And so I don't know if that family's been tested, but they may not connect to, they call themselves Sephardic, but their origin may not be in Sephardic communities from Spain. So again, only more extensive Y chromosomal DNA testing of these communities will help resolve these issues and help us figure out what is the connection between these communities that call themselves different things. So again, I'm already hinting at this, unsolved questions, right? How are Romaniotes related to other Western Jewish communities? And what are their earliest origins? I hear this story that the origin of the Romaniotes involves a ship of, I forget whether it was slaves or refugees from Judaea who shipwrecked off Greece in the year 79. It may or may not be possible to prove that, but DNA may help us clarify how likely it is that that's a significant part of the story. Okay, so how much genetic mixture was there between Romaniotes, Sephardi, Italian Jews, and others in the Balkans and Turkey? And how accurate are family traditions and surnames as markers of this origin? How much do they line up with DNA? So, very briefly, I also wanted to feature, for not HIPAA, but for privacy reasons. I'm always saying HIPAA these days. I work at a hospital. But for privacy reasons, I've been advised not to share the last names of families who've been tested, but I can just say that several important members of this community, past and present, including some who are in this room, are featured here. So you take a Y chromosome sequence, say, from the president of the synagogue, and what's really strange is there are some things that it instantly reveals, and some things that remain completely mysterious. So if you look up there, this is the name of a Y chromosome lineage, a big jumble of numbers and letters, RFTC 62453. And we know that at the very end of the timeline, this is a Greek Sephardic family from the town of Veria. And we know that if you go back to 550 BC, they match a Turkish Muslim family. We don't know where that shared ancestor was, but somewhere in the Middle East, East Mediterranean. And then if you go back to 3600 BC, they were descended from early Indo-Europeans on the steppe of Russia, many of whom ended up in the Middle East. In Europe, Middle East, India, they took over half the world pretty much. A similar story of actually other family that was very important in the running this synagogue for many decades and maybe even renovating it. Or no, I'm confusing. No, that's a different family. But similar story. They actually started out as Indo-Europeans, and the Russian steppe, or actually probably made it to the Balkans. And the trail goes dark, but by 550 CE, they are connected to a small group of Ashkenazi Jews. That doesn't mean that the Ashkenazi Jews in this group are Romaniotes. It doesn't mean that the Romaniotes are Ashkenazi. It means that if you go back 1,500 years, there was a Jew living somewhere, probably in the Mediterranean, who gave rise to two different families that went in very separate directions. And one of them ended up as Romaniotes and Janina. So, many such stories we could maybe... So the JGDF, where do we come in? So, there have been initiatives in the past to test Jews from underrepresented communities. We're really simple about our core mission, which is we're obsessed with this stuff. We talk about this stuff with each other every day. We've put together lots of schemes for understanding it. Many of us are historically trained or have a deep background in understanding one particular Jewish community. And we monitor what we think are going to be high leverage testing cases. And so we test people who we think will revolutionize our understanding of a particular lineage or help us rewrite an entire chapter in Jewish history. And we have a whole list of people, just people here in Israel and France and wherever, who we are confident will help us do that. And of course, people from under-tested communities. We're not really testing Ashkenazi Jews who are well tested enough. We are really interested in testing members of this community, for example. We're closely linked to the research community. We have endorsements from the phenomenal and very highly regarded Israeli geneticist Shai Carmi, close collaborator with him. I've published a study with him on medieval German Jews. Dr. Alexander Bader, who did a webinar with the Sephardic Digital Academy and some of our other collaborators, is the world expert on what Jewish surnames can tell us about the origins of different communities. He's formally endorsed, he's one of our, what do we call him? Advisors, yeah, so they're advisors. And then Karl Skoretsky is a close collaborator of mine. We're working on a study together. He's the guy who discovered the Cohen gene, and he is also a close research collaborator. of mine. So we are embedded in this. The research community trusts us more than anybody else. And we respect them and want to collaborate with them as much as possible. We make careful, robust historical inferences. I'm not a molecular geneticist. I know what I need to know, but I do have a background in writing history and making historical inferences. So we're really, really careful about not jumping to conclusions or not being too careful for our own good. Lining up genetic evidence with history is an art, and we think we're the best in the game at that. And we open source our results. We focus on education and collaboration. We plan on making this all accessible to people. Every discovery we make, we're not going to name names, we respect privacy, but if we learn something new from your result, we will tell you everything we know, and with your permission, we will tell the world we have solved something about Jewish history with the benefit of your DNA results. All right, so some very recent finds briefly that we have been involved in. So anything that's in yellow is something that we discovered. So for example, we're really interested, I'm super interested in, full disclosure, I'm working on a study of the DNA of Kohanim, people who, are called up first to the Torah, who can't go to cemeteries, who can't marry a divorcee, who bless the community, who say they're descended from the priests in the temples in Jerusalem. Not all of them were, but actually most of them were, it turns out. And so, for example, in this case of what is probably a Cohen branch that descended from a Roman convert, if you can believe that, we only knew of Ashkenazi Jews in it up until very recently, up until we raised money and coordinated the upgrade of an interesting Moroccan Jewish family's Y-DNA result, and we found that they actually split this lineage and are like the closest cousin to this Ashkenazi branch. So we can say this is actually a Jewish ancestor in the Mediterranean who contributed to both Ashkenazi and Moroccan communities who probably in late Roman times lived in Roman Italy. Astonishing. And then an even bigger Cohen branch, which for a while we thought only Ashkenazim had, we now know is full of Egyptian Jews, Moroccan Jews, and we're even able to say that, for example, one of these branches, around the year 800, parted two ways. One of its descendants ended up in Spain and then Morocco, and another one ended up in the earliest layer of the Ashkenazi community in medieval Germany. And we keep finding these stories. It's astonishing. People think Ashkenazi and Moroccan Jews have nothing in common. Different languages, different temperaments. Genetically, they're very similar, and we can even pinpoint the date of those connections, as long as the resources are there to test people at the sufficient resolution. So this is what we do. It's our bread and butter, and we could speak to so many more examples, but these are the ones that are top of mind. Other just general patterns we've uncovered, I'll show you a few of these without talking through all of them. We found so many Ashkenazi Sephardi connections dating back to the first millennium CE, which is considered a dark age in Jewish history for the most part. Hundreds of years without documentary sources, all of a sudden these Jews show up in France and Germany. Kind of weird. We're filling in the gaps. There are a lot of stories where sometime between the years 500 and 800, the Dark Ages, right? It's people think of this as the worst time in history after the fall of the Roman Empire. There were Jewish communities somewhere that were growing and whose direct descendants ended up in both Ashkenaz and Sepharad. So, incredible. We've also, again, developed a method that I was telling folks a little bit about for identifying Jewish lineages that go back to ancient times And we're very conservative about this. We don't just say, this lineage looks Middle Eastern, so it's from ancient Israel. It's actually not always an appropriate conclusion to make, but we developed a method for doing this that actually pretty much tells us that these two guys, Eric and Manny, even though their families took very different routes out of Israel, one to the eastern diaspora, one to the western diaspora, both seem to be from these ancient Israelite lineages based on what I think is a pretty robust method. So this is why we exist. We're here to find more examples of these things, and these stories are hidden in plain sight in the genes of people in this community, in this room, waiting to be illuminated. So, here we are. Call to action. I don't think I ran too long, actually. We are a 501c3, non-profit, tax-deductible. It really helps having multiple lawyers on our board. But we got that status this month. We're really stoked about it. So if anyone ever makes a donation, if any organization you know of makes a donation, that will be tax deductible. We will provide a letter. We have a fundraising goal that we've started progress on, $25,000. That will allow us to probably upgrade or test something on the order of 60 or so kits of people who we think might revolutionize Jewish history by having their genetic tests upgraded from a variety of different communities. We're currently spending a significant amount of our focus on Moroccan Jews as basically the largest Jewish community outside of Ashkenaz prior to the founding of the State of Israel. But we want to branch out and really do more with the Romaniotes and Ottoman, Balkan, Sephardic communities. We are beginning to broadcast our results on social media, in lectures, and hopefully in academic venues. Again, we have the partners for that. Join our project, Jewish Genetic Discovery at Family Tree DNA, if you already have a test kit that you can. And then finally, we're on the cusp of launching jewishgeneticdiscovery.org, our one-stop platform for learning more about what we do and for sharing the results that we've already been able to glean. So I think that pretty much does it. Thank you guys so much. I hope we have some time for questions. Okay, amazing. So yeah.
Thank you, Josh.
The fellow in the hat.
Fellow in the hat, that's
Yeah.
I have to, first of all, appreciate everything you told us. I'm getting my thoughts together because it's very deep, scientific. And I'm trying to understand how you deal with more practical issues. Today we deal with identity politics.
Sure.
You have Yemenites that speak Yiddish. You have Moroccans that identify with Chabad. So how does it all fit together?
That's really interesting. I mean,
I don't think we take a stand. We're trying to separate. We're just trying to find the science in our connections, and we found that. And we really, I'm a big tech guy, but not all. But whoever sort of has a connection, has the genetics. So we're just trying to map it out. Where we don't take an identity point. So.
yeah, I would leave that to personal choice, but it is a super interesting conversation.
You have one here.
Where? Sorry?
There.
Yeah,
Sure.
super interesting, but there's something that I don't understand. How do you know how DNA 2,500 years BC?
Yeah, and I figure that maybe there could have been a gap in how I communicated that. There are two ways to do that.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, repeat the question.
So I believe that this woman asked, how do you make a claim about DNA in 2500 BC? there are two ways. The ideal way that, and I should have also said, 15 years ago, there was no ancient DNA. Now we have more and more of it. So in some cases, we can actually go back and say, we found this DNA profile or lineage in people who lived in X place in 2500 BC. That's the sort of direct evidence. Most of the time, we don't have that. But what we can do is looking at how many shared mutations any two people or two groups have. We can, we know the rate at which Y chromosome DNA mutates. And we can make an estimate. We say if there are 150 shared mutations, then maybe that means these two people's last ancestor in common lived in 2500 BC. But that's sort of an indirect way of proving it. I hope that sort of helps. Okay, we can work out. I think
there are good scientific studies on the mutation rate of the Y DNA.
I'm sorry.
So this is not us, this is companies that have studies and they have they're all statistical guesses, but they're very well studied and accepted in the field.
So there are certain assumptions that are made. For example, that a generation is 30 years. Some men had children when they're 25. Some had them when they're 35. So the average is about 30 years per mutation per generation. You can tweak it here and there, but through the scientific studies, they've determined that around 30 years per generation is the right age, and then they can calibrate it. They can take lineages with very well documented genealogies. For example, in Italy, there are some aristocratic lineages, so they can take their genetic lineage and their genealogical lineage and calibrate and see if there is a correlation, and that way calibrate the model.
I see this guy. We have so many good. I'm thrilled that people are so passionate.
We all know that there was a lot of turmoil and movement of Jewish communities around the year 1492.
Yes.
Why doesn't that appear in your presentation as a key pivot point for movement of the Jews?
I suppose I maybe was taking it for granted, because what I will say is that we consistently find connections, direct Y chromosome connections. Some of them are as recent as 1492, but some are much older, between Sephardi Jews in Greece and Turkey, Sephardi Jews in Morocco, people in random corners of Portugal, people in Mexico and Puerto Rico, and that is a snapshot of the dispersal, the forced dispersal of Jews from Spain and Portugal in 1492. So that shows up extremely often, and I guess I was sort of getting at when I was talking about the composite nature of Jewish communities in the Ottoman Empire. Greek and Turkish Sephardic Jews are heavily, but not completely descended from those Jews, and that's something we're trying to tease out, because there are other groups of Jews got expelled from southern Italy and Sicily a few decades later, but also there were Jews who had always been in Greece and Turkey who got absorbed into these communities. Yes. Oh, sorry. And then we'll get to you. Sorry.
You were always talking about the Y chromosome. So when you do this testing, if we wanted to get tested, you don't want women. Is it only men that you want?
So I know this is a bad one. We eventually plan on doing testing that is not exclusively Y chromosome related. I mean, I think it's also well known that mitochondrial DNA, which is passed from mother to child, can tell us a lot about Jewish history too. What's interesting though, well, there are a few limitations though. Number one, mitochondrial DNA mutates a lot more slowly. So we can't make these very specific connections in time very often. Second, Jewish communities around the world share a lot less maternal ancestry than paternal ancestry. So our goal, and you could call it ideological, is we want to illuminate the connections between Jewish communities. And looking at male line DNA for historical reasons that are very complex and interesting and strange is much likelier to help us with that. Yes?
Yeah, looking at your stated goal of connecting Jewish communities, what would be the sweet spot? Aspirationally, what would be, the most significant connection or discovery that you would find, that you would like to find?
I can tell you personally what I would like to find, although I think it's a shared goal for many. Something like Eric's line, where we have a connection in 1100 BCE, for example, the primeval period of the formation of the ancient Israelite population. Because something like that is really showing us that this lineage most likely goes back to the very earliest days of Israel.
Okay.
And I would add to that, what we want, I think, we want to see, the Bible has a lot of, I'm a religious man, but, the Bible has some historicity, and we want to outline that, understand that historicity of the Bible. We see a lot of in the genes, people coming in, the mentioned, my lineage is probably Aramean. It's a guess, right? We'll never really know, but, there's a saying, my father was a wandering Aramean. So that we kind of want to match these things up. And the more we test, we can see, aha, this population maybe came in, there was one of the lost tribes. Maybe they moved to Babylon and then they incorporated into the community that came from Judaea. That's what I think our reach goal is, really.
I think Marvin was raising his hand, and then the fellow in the hat, and then the lady with the sunglasses.
I got these two things that are rattling in my head. What lends us to the validity of gene study that makes it for us to accept what you're saying? What is it essentially that validates what you're saying?
Well, I would say, as Manny was saying, it's a hard science. The historical inferences require some creativity and being learned in history and culture, but the science of examining how closely two genetic sequences are related and calculating how far back that is likely to trace to is hard science that's been done with humans, Neanderthals, rats, lizards.
Okay, so that's solid.
Yeah.
That's solid. The second thing that comes to my mind is that it's almost like, not prophetic, but it's something we all carry, that it's our history that's sort of pre-programmed, and we discovered it now. Oh, not us personally, but it was discovered. But how profound that is, that we carry this with us. It's almost like biblical that we carry it. You follow what I'm saying?
You are preaching the choir, yeah.
I think that's what, I was raised in atheist in the Soviet Union. This makes me much more religious as a Jew because I see the connection to the land and to my ancestors back there. So I agree with you.
You understand what I'm
saying?
saying?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
That was exactly my question. I have a couple of, what happened to the extra tribes of Israel. We all know not in our DNA, in our bio that we are Jews and we all came from the ancient land of Israel. The world's still not really sure about it. So this is really scientific evidence that's indisputable through DNA that we had an ancient claim to this land way before anybody And that is, I think, the most, listen, we were dispersed all over the world by multiple peoples and everything, but we have an ancient claim to this land. And this is indisputable. I mean, that's, to me, the most important piece.
Yeah.
One of the parts of what we're trying to do is educational, we're not talking about, we also have an educational branch, because I do feel I'm one of the old guys on the team, is that some of the younger generation, they don't know this. The young Americans, I'm sorry, all the young Americans here, they don't understand, what it means. They didn't grow up in that world. So yes, I think that's exactly correct.
So perhaps my question is a perfect foil to that question, which is, I think ultimately, the who are we is part of the question, because at some point you talk about, this is before there was a state of Israel. This is before we became Jews. Who were we? And where did we come from? And how varied and diverse were we as a group in the origination of the Jewish religion? And I think in some respects this is, when I say foil, I don't mean to be
Well, there are many academic philologists and who speculate, who write very learned books on these topics. So there are many theories
but this
that
is
are accepted in
scientific,
academia,
right?
debated back and forth on these issues
So,
as
yeah,
well.
to me, that would be one of the most important points that you guys could get to. And then I have another question. I do statistics for a living, and so I totally respect and I get the science and all of that. However, you knew that was coming. So however, is there a test, was there an original set? Do you have any kind of, or can you point to archaeological finds that actually validate any of the work that
I
you
was actually about to touch on that. I was about to say there's an extra layer to that, and that is ancient DNA, which is pretty much nascent science. It is very, what's the word, you have to deal with it gently because we're dealing with ancient remains.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in order to,
you have to
destroy maybe parts of it, not all of it. And Eric here represents haplogroup, which has been found in what is now ancient Israel or Canaan, up in the northern part of Israel, which is actually considered to be an Israelite. So I don't know if you dive into that.
Debatable. But yeah.
It is possible that we have an ancient Israelite from around 900 BCE, but it's debated whether he was actually an ancient Israelite. That's a little controversial.
So statistically speaking, if you look at the data, if you look at the FDDNA, there's error bars. They actually have their methodology for calculating what the 1+1 standard deviation plus 2 also have a stats degree as well. So, we are talking in that stochastic universe of trying to figure things out. But even then, even if you put the error bars, there's still a pattern, right? Because this is not a recombining DNA. So once it branches, you can calculate, and with the law of large numbers, you can say, okay, maybe you didn't do one generation here, but there's two, and you can sort of estimate.
The cover 14 is independent of the DNA methodologies.
I just want to make one more comment because I appreciate where you're coming from on all these fronts. There was your point about like the diverse ingredients that went into this mix. It isn't our sole intention to say this is all about common roots in the land of Israel, which is a very important part of the story, and it's astonishing. There's a lot of proof for it. But also, Jewish communities around the world, number one, emerged out of mixture in the diaspora. We're all very mixed. But also, even in the ancient Near East, right? The Bible has a particular story of the origins of the Israelites. I'm going to go on record and say, I don't think that it's the full story. And if you look at Y chromosome DNA, you can find that there were probably people in ancient Israel who, if you trace back a few thousand years, were horse-riding Indo-European warriors on the steppe of Russia and Ukraine, who made their way into the Near East. And, I studied the ancient Near East in college, so it's a passion of mine. The good news is historians, archaeologists, linguists have been excavating all these layers of history for a long time, and we can draw on all of it. Really, our DNA reflects it throughout all time and in all directions. Yes?
Hi, can you explain the numbers on the chart? Okay, so some of them have a Y, some of them don't.
Okay.
And who assigned these numbers and what are these numbers?
This is like probably my biggest mistake, not explaining that.
Well, you can't, it's arbitrary. Frankly, the first letter has some meaning, it's an old basic haplogroup. The last is, I think it's arbitrary.
It's a marker name, it's the name that was
Well,
given
why
to
do
it.
some have a Y and the others don't?
So that actually has to do with who discovered this particular mutation. We sort of give them credit by putting different letters behind it. In reality, those letters and numbers have no relevance to the actual history of the mutation and the node. It's just the name we chose to
So
assign.
wait, that was each person was tested, each of these was somebody who was tested?
Each of these, so each number and letter represents essentially a common ancestor of all the people in this
A
branch.
specific mutation.
It's a mutation, what's called a SNP, a single nucleotide polymorphism.
Yeah.
And that's the final one that they have in common. So then the way you present these people, they all come back to this final, so if you think about all these mutations through time, this is the last one that these people have in common. And these branches, that's the last one they have in common. So that's how this, people talk. And these kids, they memorize them and they know these numbers. So they talk about them. And I'm a guy who's sitting there like, I'm at the letter. That's where
There are arbitrary sequences of numbers and you guys explained well, but I'm sorry I didn't actually explicitly say this is what I'm throwing on the board.
So, this is great, we'll do better next time.
Hi, I have some practical questions. What's your sample size? How many Y males have you tested so far?
So the question of how many we've tested,
For this project.
so we've barely gotten started, but what we're drawing on, what we're reporting is, like, for example, in this branch that I'm part of, I belong to the second largest Y chromosome lineage in Ashkenazi Jews. There are like 1,300 people in this. There have been hundreds of thousands of people who've gotten some kind of Y DNA test, but as far as what we call next generation sequences, I believe they're at 90,000 or something. So the tree as it exists right now, with all of its sub-branches and everything, is made up of and progressively refined more and more by almost 100,000 samples. But
So
yeah.
these 100,000 are all Jewish men?
No, sorry, all around the world.
This is around the world, but how many Jewish men have participated in these findings?
It's an interesting question.
Probably several thousand.
Yeah, thousands.
The issue that, well, not the issue, but the driving force behind this project, or part of it, is that a huge majority of those several thousand, let's say, are Ashkenazi Jews, who are ultimately just one small, not small demographically, but historically small branch of the Jewish family tree. And to learn about the entire Jewish story, it's just not sufficient to test, to have 90% of the sample be Ashkenazi Jews. And that's what we're trying to drive towards, testing other Jewish groups to learn more about our shared history.
And all these 100,000 or 90,000 volunteers, they paid the kit, and you guys draw the results? Or do you have a grant, apart from fundraising?
Yeah.
Do you have an IRB, do you have a grant to get more sample size for your study?
So we're not, so that's a great question. Most of this is done commercially through Family Tree DNA, which is a company that's been around for about 25 years and has done amazing work in helping us discover all these things, not just for Jews, but for many groups of people around the world. We're not primarily structuring this as an academic study. So we have privacy policies and everything, but we're not planning on being bound by an IRB unless we initiate an academic study or partnership, which For what it's worth, I am involved in several Jewish DNA studies right now, but they're not directly related to JGDF.
Because
So-
maybe it's a good idea to get involved with an IRB, because you can get more samples like that. And then collaborate with institutions that work.
So we want to differentiate ourselves as, if you go through a scientific study, typically what happens is you give your sample, your DNA sample, and it's incorporated into a bank, and typically the person who donates the DNA samples, they never hear back. They've never given the full picture of, here you are, this is how you're connected to everybody else. And again, for that, they have very, very strict rules.
No, it depends how you define the IRB, but I just think that it would help you a lot having that. Because maybe more people would like to donate.
But this is something we can definitely look into. From my familiarity, is that even surnames, like last names, they're restricted. So if we get access to the data bank, we will only get geographic origins or ethnic background, but we will not, we won't be told this is Mr. Lipson and this is Mr. Polchilsky, and so we want to take it a step further and help people actually understand their results.
Okay, thank you.
And just to, if you don't mind, just to drive the point home. So this is my lineage here. This is me here, the Dagestani flag. In 2017 or 2018, when I've done the test, I was the only one in the lineage. And sometimes I had to literally, well, not literally, but had to pull teeth to explain to people what it is and how it'll help our understanding. So this is another Mountain Jewish sample that I sampled as part of the Mountain Jewish sub-project that I administer. These are samples from Azerbaijan that are only being added last year. This is an Iraqi Jew who has been upgraded with funding from our project, and a Turkish Jew from Istanbul who I pretty much had to almost come down to find and explain what it. So all of that, all that beautiful picture that you see is a culmination of years of us actively pursuing it.
And we just finally decided to formally incorporate it. But you make a really good point, Manny, that our two main challenges have been, as people doing this freelance, out of a passion for history and a passion for understanding, have had to convince people to spend the money and also to understand the relevance, to even consider spending the money. So what we're here to do is get money so that it's not nearly as much friction for people, but also to educate the entire community about what this can help us all learn together. So I think we have one more, this is going to be, I'm sorry, we can talk afterwards.
So do you consider testing data from other testing services, like
Ancestry.
It's a good question, so.
I can address that. So part of what I mentioned when I was speaking about my lineage, how we know there's a Jewish family from Damascus, some mountain Jewish families, an Arab Muslim from Tzfat, but we don't know exactly where in this tree they fall. We know they fall somewhere in the neighborhood, to put it that way. The reason is because they've taken those kinds of tests that provide some sort of preliminary result when it comes to a Y lineage, but doesn't give the resolution we need to really reconstruct this history, which is why we try to pursue testing with companies like Family Tree DNA that could help us accomplish that goal.
So what do you mean by testing to a higher resolution?
So those companies, so there's about 3 billion positions in the DNA, right, and they're double. These companies like Ancestry, 23andMe, test only about 600,000 on what's called a chip. How many do they test on the Y chromosome? So they check 14 million just on the Y chromosome. So those answers, 23andMe, that's 600 or the whole genome, not just the Y chromosome. These couple million, us just on the Y. So when you get out of 23andMe, you may get right here. So if you look at this is the on the x-axis is the timeline. You may get I'm right here.
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky, yeah. Mine's from mine came back like my results from 23andMe takes me back like 25,000 years before present, which doesn't tell me much. But because this is a deeper dive, you can find out that you're here.
Exactly how you connect to
And
everyone
then
else.
everyone else, and that's the key. And so what we're trying to do, outside of getting people to test, and hopefully folks who test, we're trying to get money. There's, when we say underrepresented community, we have communities that are based in Israel. For them, it's a lot of money to test, essentially. So they've tested and they've gotten this result. But as Manny said, we want to get them to here. We want to upgrade them, understand, where do they fall on the big tree? And that's one of the things we want to do with them. So we have them, they're coming up right here. But we want to push them further down. By the way, this is from the public information. The flags are allowed by each tester, but on the private form you get more information, but this is what you would get.
This is all publicly available. This is open source.
This is all called Discover product. And you can punch in what you have from 2020. You'll see how much further down a lot of these things. Ancestry doesn't even do parentals, unfortunately. Meaning the white chromosome. You can see how much farther down you have to learn. You just punch it into the Discover product.
And where we come in is we will be able to tell you that this sample is Jewish, or his Turkish sample is, or this one is a Kurd, for example. Because the flags themselves, they don't specify that.
I think that worked.
Thank you, everybody. Refreshments in the back, and definitely stay connected.
And if you have questions, we're not going anywhere.
That's a good question. Testing the wide So different companies make sense ancestry in different ways. But they're not going to tell you one person's not going to tell you you're African and the other
We don't need that.
It's possible. It's modeling, right? Like, these aren't objective categories. Yeah. So this is, Sure. I would say there are additional 3 tools that allow